And my first guest on this morning's program is the Independent Senator Nick Xenophon. I spoke to him a bit earlier and I began by asking him about what he thinks on the notion of a code of conduct for MPs.
Well, the reason why there's so much sound and fury about a code of conduct right now is because politicians are so much on the nose. I think that the level of disdain that politicians are held by the Australian public must be at a record level. Look, people don't need a code of conduct on how to breathe. My concern is that this could be just another layer of bureaucracy. Look, I think it's certainly worth exploring, but let's just wait and see whether it would be effective, whether it would be enforced and whether it would make a difference.
At the moment, though, the Constitution says someone or an MP can only be expelled from Parliament if they're convicted of a criminal offence and sentenced to a year or more in jail. Should there be a tougher line to enforce on MPs?
Well, my understanding of the Constitution is actually stricter than that, and if you are convicted of an offence that carries a jail term of more than 12 months or more, you're thrown out. So that means you could be done for shoplifting, for instance, which generally carries a jail term of 12 months or more, and if there is a conviction recorded, you could be thrown out. So not just being sentenced, he actually needs it's the mere fact of getting a conviction. So that's pretty strict, some would say. Look, I think there's a real issue here. The best integrity commissioner, the best code of conduct comes from being kept on our toes by the Australian people and the media. We already have rules in place in terms of pecuniary interest and the like. There might be an argument to have this done via legislation, so that if we break the rules, we're subject to a criminal offence in terms of subject to a fine or a sanction.
So you're happy to discuss this as an
sure,
idea?
Absolutely. But why are we talking about it now? It's because politicians are on the nose. Yep. It's because the level of disdain that Australians feel for politicians is at an all-time high.
But other MPs, you can't expel an MP from Parliament. Is that appropriate?
Well, I think it sets a dangerous precedent for MPs to throw someone out. It is subject, I think, to enormous political considerations, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And as much disdain as there is, for instance, against Craig Thomson at the moment, he hasn't been convicted of anything. Certainly, it just indicates that the rules are vague, but letting the Parliament, giving them that power to throw somebody out in a relatively easy fashion would really concern me.
Are the independents, your colleagues Tony Windsor, Rob Oakeshott at the moment, do you think being torn between the standards of the Parliament, not wanting to defend or be seen to be defending the embattled MP, but also balancing that with the notion of innocence until proven guilty?
Look, Tony Windsor and Rob Oakeshott in particular were concerned about parliamentary standards being lifted. That hasn't happened. You can't blame them for that. I just think it indicates that there is that balancing act. And
is it tough for them because they're now being seen to defend this gentleman's right to due process?
And look, we need to just set aside whatever people may think of Craig Thomson. He has an absolute right to due process, and once you throw out due process, that sets a very bad precedent. That opens up a Pandora's box of basically allowing that power to be abused.
Well, what did you make of Craig Thomson's explanation at the weekend? You saw it.
It was an extraordinary interview. Some people may believe him. There are other people who believe that Elvis Presley is alive doing a duet with Roy Orbison in Tijuana. I think in terms of Paul Howes, I think, summed it up in terms of the believability test. But let's wait and see what Craig Thomson says in the Parliament. But I think there's another feature there that needs to be considered, which hasn't really been considered to date. If an MP misleads the House, I'm not saying that Craig Thomson will do that, but if an MP knowingly misleads the Parliament, that raises another spectre of potential sanctions against an MP.
What about the argument that Mark Latham puts this morning in the Financial Review? Makes an interesting point, actually. He says that he's urging the coalition to tread with caution, and also urging those in Parliament to ensure pastoral support and consideration for Mr Thompson.
Mark Latham is absolutely right to say that. And let's go back about 20 years. Nick Sherry, who has just finished off a career as, I think, an outstanding minister, particularly in the area of superannuation and financial services. Let's remember what happened to him, the pressure he was under when he was accused of misusing travel entitlements. He attempted to take his life. Thank goodness he has made a full recovery to go on to be an outstanding minister. But those allegations were found to be unproven, that they were found to be false in a sense, and he was completely cleared. So we need to be a bit careful. So leaving aside what Craig Thompson may or may not have done, he's still a human being, and there is that element of pastoral care that Mark Latham quite rightly points out.
I want to ask you finally, in the context of your comments earlier in our interview where you talk about the perception of politicians in the electorate, the way that you're perceived by voters. Bill Shorten yesterday and his wife took a preemptive strike almost and took the front page of a couple of Sunday papers to say that their marriage is strong, rebutting a rumour which had swirled around the corridors of Parliament, but really not beyond that. What do you think of that move?
Look, you know, I just think it indicates how ugly things are in Parliament at the moment, how toxic the atmosphere is, how feral it is almost, and the fact that Bill Shorten and his wife felt that they had to make that statement indicates how bad things are. And if nothing else, I think Bill Shorten's statement, his wife's statement on the weekend, should be a wake-up call for all MPs to pull their heads in.
Okay. Senator Nick Xenophon, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.